And the smell of burnt toast always makes me think of my dad trying to make breakfast on a Tuesday. He'd always get it wrong, like the universe. He'd stand there, spatula in hand, a look of profound bewilderment on his face, as smoke billowed from the toaster. Then he'd sigh, a puff of frustration that. You know how it is. Some people are just built for spreadsheets and tax forms, not for culinary adventures. Anyway, I was at the lawyer's office. This woman was there, dressed in a suit. My own lawyer, some guy with perpetually damp. His pen made a little scratching sound, like. My stomach rumbled. I hadn't eaten since. Yesterday? It was Thursday. Or maybe Friday. The days blur when your inheritance is being dissected like a frog in biology class. I always hated frog dissection. And the smell, the awkwardness of trying to cut. This felt remarkably similar. The woman, the yacht suit one, she leaned forward. Her suit jacket shifted, revealing a flash of. And then there's the matter of the Caribbean. Caribbean holding. I swear I heard a faint, tinny sound of steel drums from somewhere deep within my brain. You know how it is. Your subconscious throws up random associations when you're. 1 minute you're contemplating millions, the next you're picturing a parrot. This was definitely more of a parrot and steel drums kind of moment. The smell of salt air seemed to waft. My lawyer cleared his throat. It was a wet, reedy sound, like a bird with a cold. The Caribbean holding, he repeated, his voice a little strained. He looked at me, then back at her, then at the napkin. And I caught a glimpse of a half-eaten granola. I'd been hoping for a full-service legal experience, complete with artisanal snacks. You know, like those fancy lawyers in movies who have little bowls of expensive chocolates on their desks. Clearly, I'd overestimated. This was more a grab what you can before it gets eaten by the mouse kind of situation. This woman just smiled, a tight, efficient smile. It didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were sharp, like a bird of prey spotting a particularly slow-moving rodent. And precisely. A rather lucrative venture. Very. Opaque. Opaque. Like my future, I thought. It sounded like something you'd find on a. I resisted the urge to ask if opaque. My dad always said money was like air, you couldn't see it, but it made things happen. He was good at making things happen. Usually, things that involved me cleaning up the mess. Like the time he tried to assemble a flat-pack wardrobe and ended up with a pile of particle board and a vague suspicion that he'd invented a new form of abstract sculpture. Mind you, I'd always assumed he was just a moderately successful accountant. Turns out, moderately successful is code for owns. Figures. They always got the bigger slice of the metaphorical pie. This time, the pie was literally a pie. I pictured them, probably with a ridiculously large. The damp-haired lawyer looked at me directly. His gaze was a little unfocused, as if. Jaden, are you all right? I blinked. The question felt so out of place, so. Yeah, I said. Just thinking about that time I tripped on. It was a whole production. The carton burst open, milk went under cars, all over my shoes. A kindly old lady tooted. It was deeply embarrassing. This woman, the one. It was a subtle movement, but it conveyed a universe of judgment. I just shrugged. What else was I supposed to say? My entire financial future was being handed over. You know how it is. Your brain latches onto the most irrelevant details. It's like a squirrel hoarding nuts, except the nuts are embarrassing memories. She continued, her voice gliding over the words like a cruise ship over calm waters. Your father's foresight was truly remarkable. The diversification across multiple jurisdictions. She trailed off. I, on the other hand, was picturing him. He always did have a dramatic flair for the absurd. Then she dropped it. The thing. And the one detail that made my stomach clench. It felt like a tiny, cold stone had landed there. The Cayman Trust, of course, has been Restructured. For optimal tax efficiency post-demise. Restructured. Optimal. Post-demise. It sounded like a particularly unpleasant spa treatment. I pictured my dad, post-demise, being subjected to. And it was a disturbing image. I swear I could feel my left knee start to tap. Not a gentle, casual tap. A frantic, desperate rhythm against the polished hardwood floor. Like it was trying to escape the entire conversation. To bolt out the door and hail a cab to anywhere else. My sibling. Of course. They'd probably been managing the restructuring for years. The universe, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. And a deeply unfair distribution system. This woman turned to me then, her gaze sharp and expectant. Do you have any questions? My lawyer leaned. He whispered, his voice low and urgent, Jaden, remember the agreement. Stay calm. Calm. Right. I thought about the time I accidentally set fire to the kitchen curtains trying to make toast for my dad. And it was a whole thing. Black smoke everywhere. Neighbors calling the fire department. My dad just stood there, holding a smoking. And this felt like a 5-alarm blaze. I looked at the yachtsuit woman. Her expression was unreadable, a mask of professional composure. I looked at the damp-haired lawyer. He looked like he desperately needed a shower. I looked at my tapping knee, a frantic. Yeah, I said, the words feeling heavy and strange in my mouth. Does that Caribbean holding come with a decent? It was so small, so imperceptible, but I saw it. A crack in the facade. The lawyer coughed, a sharp, unexpected sound that made me jump. The steel drums in my head got a little louder, a more insistent, tinny rhythm. I wondered if the lawyers here offered complimentary earplugs. So yeah. That was it. And then no. That's not right. The drive home was a blur of traffic. I'd agreed to the terms, shaken hands on. The office felt suddenly small. The air thick with the smell of expensive perfume and desperation. I could almost taste the salt from the phantom steel drums, a phantom ocean breeze that offered no comfort. My sibling. Somewhere, likely sunning themselves on a beach funded. The damp-haired lawyer was still scribbling. On a different napkin. This one looked cleaner, less crumpled. My knee had stopped tapping. It was replaced by a dull ache, like. I wondered if the Caribbean holding had good dentists. You know how it is. You wonder about the strangest things when you're. I just needed a drink. Or maybe a nap. The thought of that island, of my sibling. The one that always twitches when I'm trying not to scream. I got into my car. The interior still held the faint aroma of stale coffee and the lingering scent of whatever cleaning product they used on the seats. It was a generic, sterile smell. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine coughed to life, a wheezing sound. The radio was on a classic rock station. I didn't touch it. I just drove. And the drive home. That was another thing entirely. It wasn't a scenic route, no rolling hills or picturesque villages. It was just the motorway, a gray ribbon. The sky was a dull, overcast gray, the kind of sky that seemed to absorb all color and joy. I tried to focus on the road. On the white lines that demarcated the lanes, on the brake lights of the car in front. But my mind kept replaying the conversation, I passed a service station. The smell of fried food and stale coffee wafted out as cars pulled in and out. I briefly considered stopping, getting a lukewarm cup. But the thought of interacting with anyone, of having to make small talk or feign normalcy, was too much. So I kept driving. The traffic thickened as I got closer to my city. The usual gridlock, the impatient honking of horns. I found myself staring at license plates, making up stories about the people driving the cars. That one, with the personalized plate. Probably a lawyer. Or someone who'd just won the lottery and. That one, with the chipped paint and the family sticker. Probably on their way to a packed weekend. Their problems seemed so blessedly mundane compared to mine. I needed to call someone. But who? My best friend. This lady was on holiday in Thailand. She'd sent me a postcard with a picture of a monkey. A monkey in a hat. The absurdity of it all felt like a personal attack. My parents. Well, my dad was the architect of this entire tangled mess. My mom would probably just sigh and offer me a cup of tea and a sympathetic ear. But what good would that do? She couldn't magic away offshore accounts or restructure trusts. I thought about the granola bar peeking out of my lawyer's briefcase. It was probably a sensible, oat-based affair. Probably organic. I pictured him unwrapping it, a tiny, furtive. I'd been hoping for something more robust. A power bar, perhaps. Or a small, perfectly formed Danish pastry. A little something to fuel the existential dread. The radio announcer, with his overly cheerful voice, cut through my reverie. And next up, we've got a classic from Queen. Anyone else feel like conquering the world after? I just wanted to understand what was happening to my life. I turned off the motorway, navigating The houses were all similar, neat little boxes with manicured lawns. A few kids were playing in the street. I saw Mrs. Henderson watering her prize-winning roses. She waved. I managed a weak wave back. She probably thought I'd just been to the dentist. I parked the car outside my small apartment building. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Or at least, the mortgage on it was mine. I wondered if the Caribbean holding included a clause about mortgage payments. Probably not. I fumbled with my keys, the metallic jangle. I pushed open the front door. The air inside was still and quiet. It smelled faintly of dust and old books. I dropped my bag by the door. My keys clattered onto the small console table. I walked into the living room. It was exactly as I'd left it. A half-finished book lay on the coffee table. A throw blanket was draped over the back of the sofa. Nothing had changed. Yet, everything had. I stood there for a moment, just breathing. The silence was deafening. It pressed in on me, amplifying the thoughts swirling in my head. The yachtsuit woman. The damp-haired lawyer. The opaque Caribbean holding. The steel drums. My sibling. I needed to call the dentist. My left eye was definitely twitching now. A persistent, annoying flutter. It felt like my face was trying to communicate something it couldn't articulate. And I walked over to the window and looked out at the street. Mrs. Henderson was still tending her roses. The kids had moved on to playing hopscotch. Life continued, oblivious to the seismic shifts happening in my own. I thought about my dad. He was probably at home, tinkering in his. Or maybe he was planning his next breakfast disaster. And I hoped it involved something less flammable than toast. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just let my sibling inherit a tax haven while I was worrying about the price of petrol. But what? What could I possibly do? I wandered into the kitchen. The kettle sat on the counter, a silent sentinel. I filled it with water, the gurgling sound a small comfort. I found a tea bag, a generic brand that tasted vaguely of disappointment. As the water heated, I looked at my face looked pale, drawn. My left eye was still twitching. The kettle whistled. I poured the hot water into a mug. The steam rose, obscuring my reflection for a moment. I took a sip of the tea. It was weak and lukewarm. I needed a plan. A real plan. Not just a vague sense of indignation. But for now, all I could do was. And my left eye wouldn't stop twitching. The doorbell rang. It was a sharp, insistent sound that made me jump. I hadn't ordered anything. I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked to the door, my heart thumping a little faster. I peered through the peephole. It was a delivery person, holding a large, flat package. No name. No return address. Just a plain brown box. I hesitated. What if it was something from the Caribbean holding? Some sort of welcome gift? A large, opaque welcome gift? I took a deep breath and opened the door. The delivery person handed me the package. "Sign here," they said, holding out a handheld device. I scrawled my name, a shaky signature that. They left. The door closed behind them, leaving me alone with the mysterious package. I carried it into the living room and set it down on the coffee table, next to the half-finished book. I stared at it. It was oddly heavy. Should I open it? What if it was dangerous? What if it was full of offshore account statements? Or tiny steel drums? I decided to leave it for now. The tea was getting cold. My eye was still twitching. I sat down on the sofa, the package looming beside me. I picked up my book, but the words blurred on the page. My mind was elsewhere, on distant islands and hidden fortunes. I needed a nap. A long, deep nap, where I could forget about wills and trusts and tax havens. But even in sleep, I suspected, the steel drums would be playing. And my left eye would continue its relentless, anxious dance. I got up and walked back to the kitchen. I rinsed out my mug. The water ran down the drain, disappearing without a trace. Much like my inheritance, I thought. I looked at the package again. It was a dark, silent rectangle, holding its secrets close. I'd deal with it later. After a nap. And maybe a large glass of something. The smell of burnt toast, I realized, was. At least with burnt toast, you knew what you were dealing with. And you could usually air out the smell. This felt like a smell that would permeate everything. I went into the bedroom. The curtains were drawn, casting the room in a dim, twilight glow. I lay down on the bed, pulling the duvet up around me. My eye twitched. I closed my eyes. And waited for sleep to come. Or at least, for the steel drums to fade. The package remained on the coffee table. Unopened. A silent testament to the day's bizarre revelations. The damp-haired lawyer was probably already scribbling on. The yachtsuit woman was likely already on her. And my sibling. They were still unaware. Or perhaps, they were aware, and simply enjoying the ride. I hoped they'd at least send me a postcard. With a monkey. My eye twitched again. A little harder this time. I needed to call the dentist. And maybe a therapist. And possibly a private investigator. This was going to be a long week. Or month. Or year. The sound of the traffic outside seemed to. I thought about my dad's shed. What was he doing in there? Building birdhouses? Fixing a lawnmower? Or perhaps, meticulously crafting a complex offshore financial. It was hard to say. He was a man of many hidden talents. And apparently, even more hidden assets. I just wished he'd left a clearer instruction manual. Or at least, a decent breakfast recipe. The package on the coffee table seemed to taunt me. A puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to solve. But I knew I would. Eventually. Because my left eye wouldn't stop twitching. And that, more than any legal document, was. The room. Too quiet. I needed to go for a walk. Get some air. Clear my head. But the thought of leaving the apartment, So I just lay there, listening to the steel drums were definitely getting louder. Or maybe it was just the blood pounding in my ears. I needed that drink. Or a nap. Or both. And the package. It was still there. A dark, silent question mark in the dim light. I decided to ignore it for now. The universe had thrown enough at me for one day. Maybe tomorrow. Tomorrow, I would open the package. And face whatever secrets it held. And maybe, just maybe, I'd make myself some toast. Properly. Without setting anything on fire. You know how it is. You adapt. You learn. You try not to burn down the kitchen. Or your entire financial future. And the twitching continued. A tiny, persistent rebellion against the overwhelming normalcy of the world outside. I closed my eyes again. And waited. Sometimes people surprise you.